Hello, good morning, and welcome to our coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Coming up today, Israel claimed bombing of Hamas missile launcher sites near kindergarten, schools, and mosque in Gaza. Leaders of the United States, Canada, France, Germany, and others urge Israel to protect civilians. Plus, doctors at Gaza neonatal intensive care unit warn of huge catastrophe. That and more, all that and more in the course of today's program. And we begin with the strikes against targets in Gaza, including several missile launch sites near schools and a mosque, which continued over the weekend. That's according to Israeli Defense Forces, which released aerial footage of several blasts at various compounds, as well as photographs indicating their target sites in Gaza, near a kindergarten, schools, a mosque, and United Nations building. In a Telegram post, the IDF claimed that the Hamas group has been exploiting civilians and deliberately fires at rockets at Israeli civilians. This morning, Israeli aircraft struck two Hezbollah cells in Lebanon, which were planning to launch anti-tank missiles and rockets toward Israel as fighting flared across the two countries' shared border. Without providing details, Hezbollah said one of its fighters was killed. Lebanon's state-run news agency reported an Israeli airstrike on the southern outskirts of Aytarun in southern Lebanon. It also did not provide details. The Israeli military released footage of the strikes. One was on a cell adjacent to the Israeli town of Matat, around 13 kilometers southwest of Aytarun. It said the other was further north in the disputed Sheba Farms area. It was not immediately clear if the two sides were referring to the same set of incidents. Israel later said it struck more Hezbollah targets, including a compound and an observation post. There were no immediate reports of injuries or damage. Israeli aircraft struck a compound, meanwhile, beneath a mosque in the Jenin refugee camp over this weekend that the military said was being used by Palestinian militants to organize attacks. The video shows a mosque minaret standing amongst rubble and destroyed walls. An unnamed Palestinian who lives in the camp says the mosque serves between 2,000 to 3,000 people during Friday prayers. An Israeli soldier was killed by an anti-tank missile on Sunday during a raid into the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip. Israeli Defense Forces, which gave this information, adds that 3 soldiers were wounded and their families have been notified. Israeli troops have been conducting raids across the border, which the military says are meant to clear the area and gather intelligence about missing people and captives being held by Hamas in the enclave. Leaders of the United States, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and Britain have underscored their support for Israel and its right to defend itself, but also urge it to adhere to international humanitarian law and protect civilians. In a joint statement issued after a virtual meeting on the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas, the leaders welcomed the release of 2 hostages and called for the immediate release of all the remaining hostages. U.S. President Joe Biden convened a meeting of the of the group, the U.S., France, Britain, Germany, and Italy, plus Canada, after speaking with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. President Biden tweeted about his conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tweeted about his conversation with Israeli President Isaac Herzog. A further 15 aid trucks carrying food, water, and medicine arrived in Gaza over the weekend. The information, posted just after midnight local time on the platform X, is accompanied with images showing aid trucks purportedly arriving via the Rafah crossing on Gaza's border with Egypt. Director of Communications at the UN Relief and Works Agency, Juliet Tuma, confirmed 14 aid trucks entered the Rafah crossing from the Egyptian side of the besieged Gaza Strip on Sunday night. A first convoy of 20 trucks of badly needed supplies that entered Gaza on Saturday through Rafah, which had previously been out of operation after bombardments hit on the Gaza side of the border. Distribution of those supplies began on Sunday, but aid officials are still warning of a humanitarian disaster as supplies of food, water, and fuel run low. Head of the department at the neonatal intensive care unit in Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital is warning that the unit is facing a huge catastrophe with a shortage of basic life-saving medicine and the looming threat of power cuts. Dr. Nasser Bulbul explains that the department is only operating with 10 ventilators. Doctors are suffering from severe shortage of basic medicine, including antibiotics. Some members of his team have been forced to work in other hospitals in the southern areas of Gaza due to Israeli strikes and blocked roads. Doctors not only treat the neonatal, but all the children who need medical care, from around 60,000 people taking refuge in the hospital, according to the doctor. Israel's siege of Gaza, launched after the October 7 cross-border attack on southern Israel by militants of the group Hamas, has left the enclave's 2.3 million people running out of water, medicine, and fuel. Gaza's health ministry said over the weekend that Israel's air and missile strikes had killed at least 4,385 Palestinians, including hundreds of children, while over 1 million of the territory's people have been displaced. U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham has accused Iran of involvement in the October 7 Hamas terrorist onslaught that triggered Israel's Gaza counteroffensive. He had warned that any escalation of the war could exact a cost from Tehran. The Republican was speaking alongside a bipartisan group of senators who offered support to Israel in their addresses. Iran has denied involvement.
The idea that this happened without Iranian involvement is laughable. 93% of the budget over decades, the training, the equipment, all coming from the Ayatollah. I come here to let Israel know that America will be with you. I come here to let the Arab world know, let's make peace if we can. Destroying Hamas is non-negotiable. How we do it, let's talk. So we're here today to give Israel what they need to do the job of destroying the modern-day version of Nazis, Hamas. We're here today to tell Iran we're watching you. If this war grows, it's coming to your backyard. There won't be two fronts, there'll be three. I do not hate Palestinians. I hate Hamas. I know the difference. The goal going forward is to take from this horror and try to make this a better world.
Today, all of us met with a group of families of hostages. And I cannot stop thinking about a little 3-year-old girl named Abigail, who has been taken hostage by Hamas. This is her picture. Her mother was murdered, and her father was murdered as he was trying to rush little Abigail away. What kind of people commit such atrocities? This is not a close call. This is a clear case. Hamas is a terrorist group, and we must do all that we can to support Israel in its quest to eliminate Hamas.
And now we speak with President Emeritus Corporate Council on Africa and a former president of the American Center for International Leadership and a current partner of Gainful Solutions, Mr. Stephen Hayes, who joins us virtually from Washington, D.C. in the United States. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Olamide. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
I'm going to start by putting you on the spot. Hamas, how you describe them? Terrorists or militants?
Well, I think they're terrorists. For several reasons. Just the atrocities makes them terrorists, beyond any doubt. Certainly, terrorists are militants by definition. But you're not putting me on the spot by asking that. I think they're clearly a terrorist organization. They have also, since being taking over Gaza in 2006, 2007, they've not permitted elections in Gaza. So I think that clearly it's an authoritarian group. It's a terrorist group, and it needs to be stopped.
Now, the reason why I use that phrase of putting you on the spot, obviously, is because of the controversy over how Hamas is described in international media. In certain media, they don't call them terrorists. They say they're militants. Some media say terrorists, militants, and not terrorists. But we know that they have committed, in the October 7 incidents, terrorist activity. And prior to that, terrorist activity in Israel with the suicide bombings and what have you over decades. And that's why the reputation that they have, and they've been designated a terrorist organization by certain countries, but obviously not all countries. What therefore, or how about the political dimension of their activity? They are a political party. So are they a terrorist political party or a militant political party that commits terrorist acts?
They're originally a political party that was formed and elected as a reaction to the corruption in the PLO in 2006, particularly in Gaza. So they control Gaza. They have evolved, frankly, into a terrorist organization. Whether all their members of Hamas feel the same way, I would doubt. But the fact is that they have operated fully, have taken full credit for the atrocities. There is no other way to describe those atrocities other than terrorism. Terrorism in any country. Were it to be done in Gaza, that's also terrorism. So I have no problems by referring to them as a terrorist organization now.
Is there a necessity to make a distinction between the militant arm, as they've described the Axum Brigade, which they say is the militant arm of Hamas, or it's the same thing?
Right now, there has been no other statement from Hamas separating part of its own party from the militancy and from the terrorism. So no, right now, unless there's leaders from Hamas who step up, and of course if they do, you have to wonder what's going to happen to them if they do step up and condemn that violence. They've taken credit for it. So there's really no alternative in my mind to saying other than that they've become a terrorist organization.
Why do you think some countries or some schools of thought have a problem with that distinction, or calling them that?
I think historically, I mean, there is within the Palestinian movement, particularly in Gaza, historically, they're under enormous stress and pressure. There have been, I think, some decisions that just have not been wise in helping the Palestinians. It's a historic problem. Within Gaza, which is about 40% the size of Lagos, and about 50% the size of Abuja, the conditions are very, very poor. 80% unemployment. There's also desperation. So the Palestinian problem needs to be solved. That Palestinian problem has existed since 1948, and it's going to continue until there is a solution. And it's very, very obviously, it's very difficult to find that solution right now.
Indeed. October the 7th, 2023 is a day that'll live in infamy in the history of the Jewish people, certainly in their modern history. Obviously, I took that quote from, I think, your great president, FDR.
Yes, that's right, Franklin Roosevelt.
Yeah. So obviously, that was what led, that attack by the Japanese, Pearl Harbor, is what made, that brought the United States into World War II. And this is as pivotal to the Jewish history as that incident. But for it not to escalate to a regional war, do you think all the regional powers in the Middle East are playing the right cards? We saw what happened in Cairo over the weekend, where in Egypt, certain powers came together to try and find a common solution. But what can best begin to temper the mood in the Middle East now, with the fact that these hostages, over 200 human beings, are still in custody of Hamas?
Well, starting with the hostages, certainly releasing the hostages would temper that. The fact is that Hamas, I don't think Hamas wants that to be tempered. But that would be one very, very important step forward, is letting the hostages go. Is that going to happen? I doubt it, but I think that's one step. The other interesting development is that China has sent a fleet into the Indian Ocean much closer. They were already in the Indian Ocean, but they've moved their fleet closer to the crises. Does that provoke, or does that help calm? I'm not sure. There needs to be the dialogue all the way around, and it's going to be very difficult to have that dialogue given that Iran and Russia are together. And so it's going to be difficult, but the parties need to sit down. There's got to be a mediator to the crises. Right now, the U.S. cannot be that mediator because they're not going to be accepted by the Arab world right now. But that doesn't prevent the U.S. from trying to find ways to do that. But as I've said in other ways, at other times, there has to be a multilateral discussion on this. Discussion is too mild a word. There needs to be a multilateral meeting on this to resolve this. But it's never going to be resolved until the Palestinian issue is resolved.
So that's the long-term solution, the two-state solution, the Palestinian-Israeli border territory solution. What about the short-term solution? Let's talk about the hostages. We understand that there is a Holocaust survivor. So this individual survived the Holocaust, and in their same lifetime, they're taken hostage by terrorists. That must be a terrible, terrible thing for someone to go through. And we hope that they survive this incident. But remember, there's also the argument that, oh, Israel has, over the years, been untoward, to put it mildly, against the Palestinians and has oppressed the Palestinians. And there are a number of prisoners, Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons who are still there at this time. I hear no justification all the time. But you also hear this argument propounded by, we will say, pro-Palestinian schools of thought that go, oh, Israel has people in their prisons. So these hostages are a matter of course. What do you think?
I think that these are all very good questions, very challenging questions. I think in almost any war, there's no complete truth on one side or the other. The fact is that the Palestinians have lived in very poor conditions since 1948. They've been cramped. The Prime Minister Netanyahu has made his disdain for Palestinians very clear, and I think that that's been part of the problem. The conditions in which some of the Palestinian camps, and particularly in Gaza too, are abysmal. There's not any other word to describe that in my view. So yes, is there correct opinion and say, look, the Palestinians have not been treated well? No, they have not been. Part of this is the policies of Israel, but part of it, a big part too, is the policies of Hamas to refuse to recognize Israel. Israel is a reality. It's going to stay a reality. If it were close to not being a reality, then we're going to be at total war. So there needs to be reason on both sides. It's difficult to have that reason given the history that and the animosity that both sides have felt. The Hamas is divided. I should say the Palestinian movement is divided as well. There's Hamas. There's still the PLA, the Palestinian Authority, that also are split. So there's a lot of splits. There's certainly Iran's role behind the scenes. So it's. I think every side has their reasons for grievances. In many cases, the grievances from every side are justifiable, and they're not justifiable in the sense of there's good reason, but there are problems that exist in both sides. There are. I guess I go back to there are grievances on both sides that need to be addressed and be resolved.
And to identify one of those grievances, which you just mentioned, is, to paraphrase you, the conditions in Gaza were like an accident waiting to happen. But since 2006 or 7, when Israel left the Gaza Strip, we've heard from the Israeli authorities that they left them to self-determine their prosperity. But the Palestinians, or the Hamas, I should say, were more interested in revenge against Israel. And instead of building their economy, they were building their military capacity to carry out the sort of raid that they did on October the 7th, that they had everything to do to make themselves like a Singapore. Is that a correct assessment? Or is that just an Israeli argument?
My answer to that is I really don't know. I have my doubts on that. The fact is that Netanyahu and his first rounds back there split the Palestinians. He supported Hamas as a way of weakening the Palestinian Authority. Netanyahu has never been in favor of the two states or having the Palestinians on his border. So Hamas, I think, is also the creation of many political thoughts. Hamas certainly has used it as its own vindication. It has been certainly not really developing Gaza as it could. But on the other hand, once Hamas took power, it was also locked in by Israel. So it's been in a strange sort of way. It's also been an area that really is somewhat constricted in its movement and its ability to trade and so forth. So there are again no black and whites in this, except the atrocity and the killing of other people. And it's an issue that really, there are grievances on both sides, or I should say all sides, since it's clearly more than just Palestinians and Israelis. It's PLO and PLA, I should say now, and Hamas. So there are legitimate grievances. They've got to be addressed. Otherwise, this is going to continue.
You know, Mr. Hayes, the last time I used the term collateral damage on this program, it was because I saw it the first time as a kid in an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, where he went berserk because someone referred to the death of his loved one as collateral damage. But that seems to be the order of the day now, where we see these casualties on the Palestinian side as collateral damage of the Israeli strikes. But how can that be explained away? Because these are innocent civilians and innocent children, obviously not targeted deliberately by Israel, but obviously the fall guy for these sorts of incessant attacks which continue to this day. So let's talk about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. And these 14 trucks that they say have been allowed into the strip from the Rafah border. Is this a good sign of more things to come, or it's too little, too late?
Well, again, I think it's an example of yes to both sides, both questions. Yes, it's a good sign. 14 trucks are not going to meet the needs of 2 million people, of which now, a very large percentage of that 2 million are refugees in their own territory or their own country. It's not really officially in a country, but in their own territory. So it's how 14 trucks are going to meet the needs of 2 million people is beyond me. In fact, I think that's going to be impossible. There needs to be a lot more shipments, a lot more trucks coming in. So that's been difficult. And then when the border area with Egypt was hit, supposedly unintentionally, that's going to slow the delivery too. So yes, there's a humanitarian crisis here. That the longer that goes, the more outrage there's going to be in the world. Whether that outrage is justified or not, it is beside the point. There's going to be humanitarian crises, and it needs to be resolved, or this war is going to spread.
Finally, Mr. Hayes, and we're so fortunate to have you, your insights and your expertise on this program whenever you come on, the United States and their support for Israel. Could you help us make sense of what's happening with the speakership of the House of Representatives and the fact that possibly Mr. Matt Gaetz and other Republicans who didn't want Kevin McCarthy as the speaker have created a bigger problem by not being able to elect a new speaker? So what's happening? Will Jim Jordan become the speaker, or we're going to go back to Mr. Steve Scalise, or we're going to have to ask your interim speaker to adopt some powers so they can have bills that will favor the American people and American aid for Israel?
Or none of the above.
Okay.
The Republican Party has admitted now in itself that it can't get its act together. We're not going to have Jim Jordan, which I will go on record as saying would have been a disaster for America and for far beyond that. The fact that we may have come close to that is a scary proposition to me. It's a man who has very, very little international experience. I'm not sure he's traveled out of the country, but surely he has one time or another. And has very, very narrow views of the world. And I think it would have been a disaster, particularly for this country. And there are enough Republicans behind the scenes that fully agreed with that. Every vote that happened, he kept getting fewer and fewer votes. So I think that what's going to probably need to happen, whether it will or not, is that the Democrats and the Republicans are going to have some bridge. The Democrats could get a moderate Republican elected if the Republicans will reach out. The Democrats say they have reached out. I don't know the terms. Nobody knows exactly the terms that the Democrats are saying, but we can't move without having a Speaker of the House right now. And will it hurt the assistance to Israel? Yes, if it continues. Will it hurt the assistance to Ukraine? Yes, absolutely. It will also make a lot of things very, very difficult in the United States that have nothing to do with Israel or Ukraine. There has to be a Speaker of the House, or the House can't move forward. The idea of giving them giving the current interim Speaker, Patrick McHenry, has been floated and stopped also. So there needs to be some common point. There needs to be enough Republicans that are not afraid to reach out to the Democrats, and the Democrats need to also recognize, like it or not, the majority in the House of Representatives are Republicans, and they need to accommodate and save face all the way around. The Democrats have an excellent chance to really make a point and make a difference right now. But again, it requires both parties to work together. There's a very strong movement within the Republican Party not to work together, just as there are within the Democratic Party. So I think it's not going to be resolved until there's some reaching across the gap between Democrats and Republicans. If that were to happen, it would help this country enormously, and it might move us forward incrementally in getting back a more united country. It's not going to resolve the split that exists today. I think social media has done enormous damage in continuing to pit one person against another, not only in the United States but around the world. With all kinds of false narratives. But the Democrats and Republicans have an enormous opportunity to make a difference right now to this country. Whether they will or not remains to be seen.
In other words, we haven't seen the end of this movie either.
Nope, it's not. It's they're not getting back together until Tuesday. So again, and it's going to. If it's resolved this next week, I'll be surprised. But this whole world has been surprised by almost everything this last year.
Indeed. Very interesting times we're living in. Thank you so much, Mr. Stephen Hayes, who is a partner with Gainful Solutions, joined us from Washington, D.C. Many thanks for being on the program this morning.
Thank you. It's an honor, as usual. Thank you.
Still ahead. Thousands of supporters of Palestinians and Israel protest across the United States. Please stay with us.
In the world of diplomacy,
Welcome to the second half of today's coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. Thousands of Israel and Palestinian supporters gathered in protest on Sunday in several cities across the United States. Palestinian supporters marched through the streets of Raleigh, North Carolina, while the Jewish community in Glen Cove, New York, held a vigil for Israel. Israel unleashed an aerial blitz on Gaza to its southwest after Hamas breached the border on October the 7th and killed over 1,400 people, many civilians, and took over 200 people hostages back to Gaza. About 4,650 Palestinians are also confirmed killed in the bombardment by Israel over the weekend. That's according to Hamas-run health authorities in the enclave. They also claim 266 people killed over 24 hours, including 117 children.
It's really, this gathering is to come together and to share our feelings about what happened 2 weeks ago to our brothers and sisters in Israel. And it's painful for each one of us. So it's really to show our support that the nation of Israel, they are not alone. We are here with them, side by side.
We felt that it was very much an apropos time for us to get together as families, any age range, 2 to 120, to say that we are in solidarity with Israel and to walk around and be the people that bring light into the world.
In Denmark, crowds of pro-Palestinian demonstrators marched through Copenhagen to Christiansborg Palace, which houses the Danish parliament. The protesters made their way from the Nørrebro neighborhood through the streets of the Danish capital to the parliament building, waving Palestinian flags and chanting slogans in support of Gaza. Danish media reported that thousands attended the march organized to protest Israel's total siege of Gaza after Hamas' deadly mass infiltration into Israel on October the 7th. Family members of hostages currently held by Hamas met with Israel's president, Isaac Herzog, furthering their plea for the Israeli government to facilitate the safe and immediate return of their loved ones. According to the organizers of the event, about 80 family members met with the president, Isaac Herzog, at his residence in Jerusalem. Among them were the parents of 23-year-old Israeli-American hostage Hirsch Goldberg-Polin. Hirsch's parents were told by witnesses of the attack that one of Hirsch's limbs was blown off by an exploding grenade, and his parents are deeply worried about his health if he's unable to receive proper medical care. Israel has confirmed that 212 people now, 212 people are being held hostage in Gaza.
We're asking for everybody around the world, Sarei Chutz, foreign ministers from the 30 countries where there are hostages, to scream, let in the medical care. We've talked to doctors. The doctors have said, if he gets the treatment that he needs, he has a decent chance. If he still hasn't gotten it, it's a dire situation. He needs surgery, he needs intensive antibiotics, and we're screaming to anybody who will listen, let in the medical care and bring all 200 of these people home to their families.
First of all, he showed us support, and he showed us and he told us that the Israeli government is doing everything in their power to get our loved ones back. And secondly, it was very important for him to hear our stories, to get to know our loved ones.
About 20,000 people packed into London's Trafalgar Square to demand the release of more than 200 hostages taken by Hamas during the October 7 incursion from Gaza into Israel. One woman described how she was listening over a phone line as her mother and brother were taken hostage in a kibbutz. Many demonstrators wept as the names of hostages were read out to the crowd. The rally followed a pro-Palestinian demonstration on Saturday, in which an estimated 100,000 people marched through the streets of London.
My message to Hamas is, this is about humans, this is about human life and bringing people home to their families. You have families, you have kids, you have mums, dads, grandmas. If you were in this position, you wouldn't want to be separated from them. No one wants to be separated from them. Everyone here gets to go home to be with their families tonight. You get to go home and be with your family and have dinner with your family, whereas 210 people don't. And that is what we're calling for today.
I'm sure they'll do everything in their power to get back the people taken, kidnapped. But at the end of the day, they have to deal with Hamas. They have to, it can never, ever, ever happen again. My family were in the Holocaust, and my grandmother died in Auschwitz. We said never again. It's kind of never, we can never let it happen again.
We now bring in former U.S. Army captain and current National Defense and Military Strategist, Captain Bish Johnson, joining us from our Abuja studio, North Central Nigeria. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Good morning to you, Olumide.
Thank you so much for making out the time, Captain Johnson. Captain, listen, I think it's only fair that I start with you the same way I started with our previous guest, Mr. Hayes, to which she replied when I asked that Hamas, terrorists or militants, and I said I was going to put him on the spot. He said he had no problem, that it wasn't putting him on the spot, that he had no problem calling them terrorists. But a lot of people seem to have that problem. How do you describe that organization? A political party? A terrorist organization? What?
Well, Olumide, if you go by their antecedents, sending out across the border suicide bombers to blow up bus stations and kill people at restaurants, suicide bombings, sending innocent children across to go and blow themselves up. And then you add it to what happened on 7th of October, where they breached the border, went over to Israel and, killed several hundred innocent people, most of whom are women, children, elderly, and then took over 200 of them hostage. You go by that antecedent, and since their inception, and you read some of the things that they had included in their various materials, their charters, I don't think anybody will have any problem classifying these people as terrorists. They're terrorists. They operate in the same way, a manner as ISIS did. And so I, too, like your previous speaker, I don't have any problem at all classifying Hamas as a terrorist organization. There is no political party that does what Hamas is doing. No political party operates in that fashion. And so the fact that they operate in that fashion makes them terrorist organization.
How do we then understand the argument that this is a simmering situation waiting to happen, an accident waiting to happen by the conditions foisted on them by Israel's position against them over the years? That they are freedom fighters and they're trying to liberate themselves from the occupiers?
Well, if you go back in history, because I think the problem we are having now is that a lot of people are just, trying to analyze the problem as if it started today. The problem in that area did not start today. The Palestinians or the Arabs, because there were no Palestinians, they were Arabs. They have had multiple opportunities to be able to have their own state, in which they rejected all of them. The Israeli people accepted all of the conditions that were given to them. All they wanted is to have their own state, a Jewish state, alongside another state, the Arab state. But at every turn in history, the Arabs have rejected all of the conditions. They want 100% of the land in that area, nothing short of 100%. While the Israelis had always accepted whatever percentage of the land that has been given to them. So if we are looking at it as what is happening now, you think that, okay, yeah, the Israelis are the oppressors and these people are the victims. But you have to go back in history. It's only when you go back in history that you understand how we got to where we are today. Had they accepted the conditions that were given to them in the past and have their own state, living side by side with the Jewish state, then Israel, there probably wouldn't have been that 1967 war. They probably wouldn't have been the one in 1973. All of them would have been living together, side by side, a Jewish state living side by side with an Arab state called Palestine.
Indeed, Captain Johnson, this war in the Middle East now and the Ukraine-Russia war is forcing people to have to read up and go into history so as to not make hasty conclusions and determinations on your opinions on different issues. So one can't just look at it and just make a quick assessment without knowing the history. You're quite correct. But now the military dimension of this matter, Captain Johnson, the movie Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise was always faced with a terrible situation that seemed impossible. And what made that franchise so successful is he managed, at the end of the day, with a crack team of spies and experts to save the day and do the mission impossible. I know with God, all things are possible. But the rescue of these hostages, do you think the Israelis are even going to try to do it? How do you think this is going to play out? Obviously, and also, could you tell us what you feel about the delay in the incursion into Gaza by Israel?
I don't know how this whole thing is going to end up, but one thing I can tell you is that, with those hostages in the midst, the situation is even more complicated. He has made the objective or the mission of the IDF much more difficult for them. They've stated that their objective is to eliminate Hamas so that they don't have to experience what happened on 7th of October. Now, they could have gone more forcefully had there not been those hostages in the midst. Because whatever they're doing, they have to put those hostages into their calculations. They can't go as harsh or as hard as they probably could have gone because they don't want to take any action that will lead to the death of those hostages. So how this is going to end up, I don't know. But one thing is certain, unfortunately, they may not be able to rescue or recover all of those hostages. Hamas knew this from day one, and that's why they made sure that they did not only murder people when they breached the border, they took some hostages, brought them back into Gaza because they want to use those hostages as a bargaining chip. Right now, the only thing Hamas has are those hostages, and I don't think they're going to give those hostages up just easily like that. They will have to extract some serious, concessions from the Israelis, and perhaps all the other nationals, the other countries that their nationals are also being held hostages. So I don't know. The presence of those hostages, I can tell you, had made the whole situation even much more complicated. It's an already complicated situation, but having the hostages in the midst has made it even more complicated.
And also, what about the Palestinians in Gaza who are obviously civilians, innocent civilians? That also must make it harder for the Israelis as well, because they don't want to be killing innocent civilians. And we were told over 200 children have died, 200 Palestinian children have died. But that's according to Hamas, but that's what they said.
Yes, and you know, this war is not just about military operations. In fact, modern warfare is beyond that now. Information warfare has become a very important part of modern warfare, and so you need the support of the civil population. Like the case of Israel, they need international support. Even the Palestinians themselves, need that international support as well. If you be watching television, you see how everybody is twisting this thing in a manner for them to gain that international support. Now, if the Israelis, if a whole bunch of Palestinian civilians, particularly innocent children and women and elderly people, are dying as a result of the military activities of the Israelis in Gaza, of course, that is not going to help Israel that much, because in that case now they will lose much of the international backing that they have already secured. Most countries, when this thing began, had always said, look, Israel has the right to defend themselves. But you see now, with all these pictures that are coming out, the bombing of, that hospital and the large number of innocent civilians that are getting killed, people are now beginning to, say, hey, hold on a minute. Even in war situation, there are rules in war. And Israel being a democracy, it has to follow those rules of war, those laws of war. And it can't just go there because he's looking for Hamas, he wants to degrade Hamas, and then, they are incurring, an intolerable level of collateral damages and in terms of loss of lives.
Why haven't Hamas listed their demands to release the hostages?
I think they want to take their time. I think Hamas wants to take their time. They want to make the situation much more complicated and much more difficult, because they believe that that is when they will not, extract more consensus from the Israelis. They don't want to be out there, put out their demands immediately, because they want to take their time. Obviously, it seems like wherever they are, they feel safe wherever they are, so for them to come out and put up demands. If they don't feel safe wherever they are, by now they would have been feeling the pressure from the military, Israeli military operations in Gaza. But obviously, the fact that they are reluctant to even ask for any demands now means that they are not under intense pressure as we may have assumed that they are.
One of the things that they said, they were quoted to have said immediately the day on October the 8th was that they have, or October the 7th itself, they said that they have enough Israeli hostages to free all Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons. So obviously maybe that was a consideration for them. But how much do you think of a role do countries like Egypt or Qatar have to play in securing dialogue with Israel to release these hostages? Do you think that they can bring their influence to bear? Obviously, if Iran or Qatar or Egypt bring their influence to bear on Hamas, surely they'll begin to think about releasing those hostages. Otherwise, how can this situation ever move forward?
Obviously, those countries do have some level of influence over Hamas, particularly Qatar, Iran. You know, without the support, the financial support that they get from some of all these countries, there won't be any Hamas. Hamas will not be able to fund itself. They will not have been able to fund that their incursion into Israeli territory. It's because they're getting those supports from those countries that they were able to not only resource that operation, they were able to train and still were able to execute. And so those countries certainly do have some level of leverage over them. And I'm sure Hamas would not want to lose the support of those countries that have been backing them, you know, because if they do, Hamas probably will be able to achieve anything on their own. And so those countries can bring that leverage to bear to appeal to Hamas to release those hostages. But those countries too are mindful of the fact that Hamas will also need to extract some concession from the international community and Israelis as a condition for them to be able to release those hostages. And so there's no doubt. You've seen the two hostages that were released, the Americans that were released, the woman and the daughter that were released. It's been credited that some of those countries may have played some critical role in getting the release of those two hostages secured from Hamas. And I think that that's what is still going to go on, and it's probably going on behind the scenes that we are not aware of.
Okay, thank you. Well, yes, that's the picture of those two hostages that have not been released. We understand also that Hamas said that they wanted to release 2 more hostages because of humanitarian concerns, but Israel refused. We heard that on other international media. But we thank you so much for your insight this morning. Captain Bish Johnson, a U.S. Army captain, national defense and military strategist who joined us from our Abuja studio. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Olumide, for having me.
Many thanks. Police in Berlin arrested several people when they broke up an unauthorized pro-Palestinian rally on Sunday. About 300 people gathered at central Potsdam Square, not too far from Brandenburg Gate, where German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier was addressing a solidarity rally and urged attendees to stand against anti-Semitism. Germany, along with France, is home to the European Union's largest Jewish and Muslim communities. Both countries have cracked down on pro-Palestinian groups since Hamas burst over the border from Gaza. The government say the curbs on demonstrations are to stop public disorder and prevent anti-Semitism. With an estimated 30,000 Palestinians, Berlin is one of the largest diaspora communities outside the Middle East, and anxiety over what is happening in Gaza is running high. Finally, Omar Obeidat took his 3 children to a pro-Palestinian protest in Amman, Jordan, to teach them to support Gazan children. Obeidat's offspring are among dozens of Jordanian children who formed a human chain to show solidarity with Gaza and its children. The children in Gaza are showing ever more signs of trauma 2 weeks into Israel's intense bombardment, parents and psychiatrists in the enclave report. Children make up about half of Gaza's 2.3 million population, living under constant bombardment, with many packed into temporary shelters in UN-run schools after fleeing their homes with little food or clean water. That's how we leave it on Israel-Hamas war this morning. Thank you for watching. Stay with Channels Television for all of the news, all of the time. I'm Olumide Macaulay.